what to do with big ideas, why creativity rules, and why teaching is all emotion. All right. Hey ho, let's go. Hello, my legendary friends, and welcome to Legends and Losers. And if you're a longtime listener, want to welcome you back to another extraordinary episode. Our guest today is the amazing, the legendary, the gifted, the talented, and the incredibly generous Dr. and Professor Tina Seelig from Stanford. And man, is she incredible. She's going to blow your mind. Now, if you're new to Legends and Losers, this is not your typical podcast. See, on most podcasts, they do interviews. And what happens in an interview is typically a very successful person of one sort or another shows up with their talking points. And they've been very well media trained on these talking points. And then they are in interviewee mode. And then there's an interviewer who's a very skilled, often journalist, and they're very good at driving to whatever narrative they want to drive to. And so you have an interviewer with a narrative, and you have an interviewee with talking points, and they kind of collide, and that's what we get. And I don't know about you. For the most part, I find a lot of those incredibly unhelpful, uninteresting, and really I could give a shit because they're prepackaged. Oftentimes, they don't tell us very much new. And by definition, they're fairly inauthentic. And I don't know about you. I've just gotten to a place in my life where if it's not substantive, if it's not real, and it's not fun and funny and engaging, then I'm not interested. And so what we aspire to do here at Legends and Losers is none of that. This is a dialogue show. So I'm not a host, or I guess I'm a host, but I'm not a journalist. I'm certainly not an interviewer. And the experience we want you to have as a listener is an eavesdropping experience. Two people, sometimes three people, having a conversation, and hopefully it's fun, engaging, a little smart, enlightening about something, motivating, inspiring, on how to design a legendary business or a legendary life or both. And we also hit on incredibly important topics like how the Tyrannosaurus Rex turned into the modern day chicken and why the modern day chicken is probably a better pet than a dog or a cat. And dogs and cats don't make breakfast now, do they? And that's kind of what the show's like. And so it's probably unlike most other things you've ever heard if you're tuning in for the first time. And I just ask you to, like it says in our theme music, strap yourself in and enjoy something very different. Also wanted to touch on briefly my co-host Colin. Been getting some emails about, hey, where's Colin? Well, Colin hasn't been around very much lately. We had him on a episode not that long ago of Trading Legendary Stories, but as you could tell, he hasn't been participating in the show very much in the last couple months. And Colin is doing great, so let me tell you that. And he's got some very fun, exciting stuff happening in his personal life, which I don't know if he'd want me to share, so I'll just shut up about that. But let me just say he's happy. And things are going great for him in business. He's his business equity directory is doing great. They just did a big upgrade, and he's working on a bunch of other things. And so he's just a busy boy with a busy life. And we're hoping to have him back on a little bit more regular basis. But the net of it is he will join us when he can, and when he can't, you're stuck with me. All right, onelifefullylive.org. We're a nonprofit started by my dear friend Tim Rode. I've been helping him with the organization since before it was founded. And the goal of One Life Fully Lived is to help people dream, plan, and live their best life. And to kind of pull all of the information and thinking and knowledge and training and this new term, masterminding, together around those topics and try to make them as available for as close to free as possible. So that's what One Life Fully Lived is, onelifefullylive.org. And we have our giant annual event in Sacramento, October 21 and 22. I think we may be sold out by the time this airs, but certainly check it out, and hopefully you can squeeze yourself in October 21 or 22 or 21 and 22 in Sacramento. All right, Professor Tina Seelig. Let me just say, this is a person who I just am in love with. She is an amazingly inspiring human being. And she was, she made an incalculable contribution to me, and I think to my co-authors, but I'll let them speak for themselves, but to me for sure in the writing and creating of our book, Play Bigger. And on a whole number of dimensions. But she really just encouraged us along the way and gave us a lot of great ideas and things to think about. And I will be forever grateful to her for that. I also met Professor Seelig through one of my best friends in the world, Peggy Burke, who's been a guest here on Legends and Losers. She is the grand dame of branding in Silicon Valley. She's the founder of 1185 Design. And she's also married to an amazing guy named Dennis Boyle. And Dennis is one of the founders of IDEO. And if you're into design, the episode with Dennis and Peggy of Legends and Losers will blow your mind. But that's how I met Tina originally. And let me give you some of her official info here. Dr. Seelig is the professor of the practice in the Department of Management, Science, and Engineering at Stanford University. Yeah, put that in your pipe. She's also the factory. Yeah, she's the factory director. You could tell who the university professor is and who the high school dropout is, can't you? She's the faculty director of the Stanford Technology Ventures Program at the Entrepreneurship Center at the Stanford School of Engineering. She teaches on creativity, innovation, and entrepreneurship. She's won some extraordinary awards like the SV Forum Vision Award, the Gordon Prize from the National Academy of Engineering in recognition for her leadership as an engineering educator. She received a graduate teaching award for graduate teaching in management science and engineering. And she's also the 2008 National Olympus Innovation Award and the 2005 Stanford Award for Excellence in Undergraduate Teaching. Dr. Seelig earned her PhD in neuroscience from Stanford, the Stanford School of Medicine, where she studied one of the topics that I'm actually most interested in, neuroplasty. She's written, get your mind around this, 17 books and educational games. She's prolific. She's also had a tremendous amount to do with bringing tons of legendary Stanford content onto the internet and kind of creating a TED-like atmosphere for a lot of the guest lecturers they have, as well as their professors and other thought leaders connected to and associated with and speaking at Stanford. And so her contribution to digital learning and just giving away stuff, intellectual capital on the internet for free is probably incalculable as well. Her new book is called Creativity Rules. It is absolutely fantastic. It's subtitled Get Ideas Out of Your Head into the World. Her and I share a publisher in HarperCollins, and she's an extraordinary woman with a lot of great stuff to share with us. Here she is, Professor Tina Seelig on Legends and Losers. Where were you hiking?
I was hiking this morning around my neighborhood, which is very hilly, and then with my sister was in town around Stanford. Okay, there you go. All right.
I would have thought that you did a lot of Stanford hiking. That would have just been a guess.
Yeah. Well, it was kind of fun. I was just showing her around.
And your sister?
Yeah.
And does she live in the area, or is she from out of town?
She lives down south in Laguna Beach.
How nice. I was just in San Diego.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. Where did you grow up?
Have we started?
Yes, we have.
I grew up in New Jersey.
And when did you come to California?
So, it's funny because I came out here I came out for vacation and never left. I was in grad school back east, and everybody was all happy. My family, oh, you're going to be a PhD student back east. Everything's all set. And I came out here after my first semester, and I said, to Santa Cruz, actually. And I said, so why am I living there when I could be living here? And
what was it about Santa Cruz that made you feel that way?
I just felt like it was my people. And so I was this hippie chick, and I drove across the country. I took a leave of absence. I drove across the country, and I had no idea what I was going to do.
How exciting.
And, let's just say my parents, you'll love this story, okay? You'll love this. My parents had just given me, as a graduation present from college and starting grad school, my first car. It was a Chevy Citation. And,
that's a little car, if I remember right.
And they said, were so upset that I was leaving grad school. They said, fine, we're going to take the car away. And I said, no worries, I'll just get a motorcycle. They said, fine, keep the car.
And did you drive that citation across the country?
I did in, I think, 60 hours straight across the country with my cat. And I moved into Santa Cruz. I had no idea what I was going to do. And it was really quite an emotional experience trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And you know, it's interesting, that feeling sort of never ends, does it? Right? That you're always reinventing your life. People think, you know, I teach all these students who think that, wow, at some point it's all going to make sense. And you realize, no, it's always just evolving.
Yeah, I keep thinking, it's funny that we're talking about this because I had this aha very recently, Tina, which was, I noticed that for a lot of my life, sort of sitting in the back of my head was, oh, well, we're very close to the new normal. And then I've had times in my life where I think, okay, this is the new normal. And I sort of settle into whatever the thing is, the work, the spouse, the place I'm living or whatever it is. And then you notice I'm in this transition period again, and you're waiting for the new normal. And then the new normal shows up, and then you're in a transition period. And of course, the aha is that's life, right?
Right. Well, you know, I love it. I was listening to a podcast today when I was walking, and there's this wonderful research that's been done that if you ask anyone at any age how much they anticipate changing over the next 10 years, most people say they expect that they're pretty much where they're going to be and that they are who they're going to be. But if you ask them how much they've changed over the last 10 years, they go, oh my gosh, I've changed so much. And in fact, I did a little experiment with this. I asked my dad, who's 91. I said, Dad, how much have you changed over the last 10 years? And he said, oh my God, I've changed so much. So I realized it never stops.
So apparently from 81 to 91, there's big changes coming.
Big changes coming, yeah.
Where does Dad live?
My parents live really close here. They live in a retirement community called the V, which is right across from Stanford. And my dad has taken over 50 Stanford continuing studies classes.
Wow, that's great.
He should just get another degree from Stanford. Yeah. He's
or
something else,
some kind of an honorary something.
You know, I actually have my blog, I guess blog post from him that a couple weeks ago where he gave a lecture and wrote the whole thing up on his view on the future of AI. You know, a couple weeks earlier, he interviewed Bill Perry about North Korea. So he's a very engaged guy.
That is so great. What's his first name?
Jerry.
Jerry.
Oh, you would love him.
I'd love to meet him, Professor. I would absolutely love to have dinner with you and him.
Yeah. We'd have fun.
Maybe he can come on Legends and Losers.
Oh my goodness, that would be so great.
Would he do you think he'd do it?
Really enjoy chatting with him.
Well, maybe we should do a 2-parter with a follow-up with you and your dad with Jerry.
You know what? Let's do it.
All right.
I would love it.
I'm in. So
okay.
Hey, here's the question, or I got a lot of questions I'm dying to ask you, but what does it feel like to be a senior Stanford professor?
Well, I kind of sneaked into that role. You know, it's funny because you're always so polite and call me professor. Of course,
I like calling you professor.
Yeah. You should call me Tina. I am in a very unusual. I am an object lesson to people on campus because 18 years ago, I decided I wanted to. Do you know the story?
No, I don't.
So 18 years ago, I decided I wanted to go back to work full time. I had been doing my own work and consulting and writing books. And I said I only wanted to work at Stanford. So I started looking at jobs, you know, I'm thinking of what my old computer looked like 18 years ago, you know, some funky box. And, you know, I was looking at all those jobs and applying to all different roles at Stanford. And I was having some luck getting some interviews, but a lot of them I didn't even get interviews. And there was a job that looked kind of curious and interesting. It was a job at the School of Engineering to help run the Stanford Technology Ventures program, which was this brand new entrepreneurship center in the School of Engineering. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. Engineering, you know, technology, education, entrepreneurship, innovation. That sounds all very cool. But I took the job description, crumpled it up, and threw it away because it was way too junior. It was like this entry-level sort of admin job. But the next day I took it out of the garbage.
I have a feeling even when you were young, you were not entry level at anything.
That's actually not true. I have always, well, in fact, you'll hear this story because I always start at the bottom. Always.
Wow.
And so I'm always at the bottom of the learning curve. So what happened is the next day I pulled it out of the garbage and I said, there's something in here. I should actually look at it. So I flattened it out and I wrote a letter. In fact, I recently found the cover letter I wrote in 1999 for this job. And I got an interview and I got another interview and another. I had 11 interviews for this job. 11 interviews.
I guess Stanford isn't kidding about
Exactly. So I took the job, started June 1st, 1999, as sort of the assistant director, but it really was, like a glorified admin. And I, the next year, became the director. The year after, I became the executive director. And a few years later, I had set my intention on what do I need to do to be a real professor? So I just started teaching classes. I started volunteering. One of my faculty colleagues didn't want to teach a class on creativity. And I said, pick me, I'll teach that class. And so I just started teaching. And then I started designing new courses. And pretty soon, this is sort of the, do the job until you get the job. And ultimately, 5 years ago, they made me a real professor.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize it was as recent as 5 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, it's a special professorship title. It's called Professor of the Practice.
Yeah. What does that mean? It's a strange phrase.
The only one ever in the School of Engineering.
Your title has
it's designed for people who are sort of in the practice of engineering. So anyway, that's the story. But here's what I tell people. I just want to say one thing. Here's what I tell people. When you get a job, you do not get that job. You get the keys to the building. And that's the key. That is the key. Don't worry where you start. Once you get in the door, it's up to you to figure out the opportunities.
So back in 99, you weren't taking that job. You were getting a job at Stanford. You were going to work at Stanford.
Exactly.
That's such a smart way to think about it.
Yeah. So anyway, that's the story.
I love that story. Now, you've had a lot to do with getting Stanford on the internet in a very big way, podcasting, video, blogging. And so I have to ask you about the Stanford eCorner. I mean, you have created a TED-like asset or set of assets with the Stanford eCorner. Do you think that's a fair comparison?
Well, I love that. That's very nice. That's very flattering. So we do.
It's true. I mean, it's amazing what you have.
Yeah, we have an incredible collection. It's our eCorner. You're right. It's at ecorner.stanford.edu. And we've been doing this for years and years. Every single quarter, we bring in 8 different speakers. And we pride ourselves on getting people often just as their career is starting to take off. So, for example, we had Mark Zuckerberg in 2005. And so it's so great. Facebook he's in a conversation with Jim Breyer from Excel, and he's got his hoodie on, and, he's very, it's very authentic. They had literally just started putting photos on Facebook. So we get these snapshots in time of people in different roles, and they come in and they talk to the students and tell them what they've learned. So it's great. And what I'm most proud of, we have a wonderful team, really wonderful team who puts this on. But I was the one who said, you know what, I would love to see if people would like just audio. It was before the term podcast even existed. But I thought, maybe people would like to listen to these on the go on their little MP3 player. So we've got a grad student to come in and sort of build out the podcasting platform. And so that's taken off. It's one of the top podcasts on iTunes for higher education.
It's incredible. And, one of the things I'm apt to say today is, with podcasting, TED and the wonderful things that they've done. And Stanford being a leader, and of course there are other serious institutions who are now doing similar things, but you have put so much content out there. There's so much amazing content out there. I say this is the worst time in history. There's no excuse to be stupid.
Well, it's a really good point. In fact, I was talking with my family about this at dinner last night. It's hard to have an excuse to not know something if you're curious about it, right? If you're curious about something, all you have to do is say, "Hey, Google, how do I learn how to do X, Y, Z?" And it all comes to you. I think about how different it was when I was a kid, and you might have the World Book Encyclopedia that you could look things up.
I remember when the World Book salesman came to the door, and my mom, Jackie, bought the World Book, and we didn't have much money at all, and she bought the sales pitch, and it was true. If you wanted your kids to learn, that was the kind of thing you had to have in your home.
Exactly. In fact, it's really funny because I have a cousin who's very, very smart and was very precocious. And when they ordered it, they got one at a time, right? And so when they would get a book, he would devour it. So he literally read the entire World Book from A to Z. Each month they would get a different one, and he would read the whole thing.
The other thing I used to love about the World Books is, remember, they would come out with an update every year, a new book that had the year on the spine, and you'd kind of go through it and sort of recap the year and go, oh yeah, I remember all that. And so you guys, what percentage of Stanford's curriculum is available online? Do you know?
Oh, that's a really good question. I have absolutely no idea. I mean, I know that there's been a lot of experimenting with what is the future of education in general, and how does the distribution channel of putting things online affect teaching. And there are a lot of people who are experimenting with, flipped classrooms. We're putting lectures online and then doing activities in the classroom. Honestly, I don't ever lecture, so
You don't ever lecture?
I don't ever lecture. I have I have a strong philosophy about teaching, that teaching is all experiential. It's all emotional. If you don't have an emotional reaction to the content, then you aren't going to learn it. And so I try to create experiences in each class that leave people wanting to know more about it. And then any sort of readings or homework follows that, as opposed to beforehand.
And so we used to hear, I remember hearing things as a boy even, that the job of a teacher was to kind of spark curiosity. It wasn't, of course, there's some content you're delivering, of course, but that ultimately what you're doing is you're teaching people to learn and to be curious and to have a construct in their mind for how to learn things, and when they are curious in something, how to dive into it and so forth. And so it's interesting that you've taken that kind of an approach.
Yeah, and in fact, it's really kind of funny because I don't even publish my syllabus. Every single class is a surprise. So
kind of like a Legends and Losers episode.
What's going to happen?
So when I take your class, obviously I know what the topic of the class is, but
exactly.
From class to class, I don't know what you're going to do.
What's going to happen each day. You're going to come in and the class is going to be set up in a different way. You're going to be forced out of your comfort zone in some way.
So Professor Seelig is like a box full of chocolates?
Maybe.
And so I'm curious, you hear people say things today, particularly because of Stanford and some of the others who you guys have contributed so much of your intellectual capital, if I can call it that, to the internet, that today you can get the degree without the diploma if you want. Right? Have you heard that expression?
You can do that in general, right? In general, what you can do, there's so much information available. I mean, honestly, people teach themselves computer science. You could teach yourself history. You could teach yourself anything. I think that what is most interesting about a university is the people who are there, right? You're creating a community of people, and you're hoping for some interesting cross-pollination that happens. I often think, what can I do in this classroom with this group of people at this moment in time that they couldn't do anywhere else? And so I think we have to, in a day and age where information is a commodity, you really have to think about what do you need to do and what can you do in a classroom setting. It's totally ridiculous to get up and just lecture when that information might be available somewhere else.
And I also find it fascinating that I guess you could argue Stanford's in the intellectual capital business, or at least that's part of the business. And yet you folks, and you in particular, have been a big part of giving so much of the knowledge away on the internet. And so how do you think about that? How do you think about that?
I think, being generous is actually one of our values, prolific and generous. And so we feel really strongly that it is our responsibility to share what we're doing with the rest of the world. I mean, one of the things that happens at a place like Stanford is that people come away feeling very empowered. If you come to my office, you will see big signs painted on the wall. And one says, every problem is an opportunity. The bigger the problem, the bigger the opportunity. And the other wall is painted and it says, entrepreneurs do much more than imaginable with much less than seems possible. Now, you didn't see anything about startups. You didn't see anything about money. You just saw our philosophy about looking at the world as opportunity rich and a place where you can really make things happen. And so that's what we're teaching people. We're essentially giving them the knowledge, the skills, and the mindset that is required to make a difference in the world.
Incredible.
So
I love it. I love it. And it's funny, in the United States, I wouldn't have even graduated high school. And whenever I go to Stanford, I have the opportunity to go, on a somewhat regular basis. I leave empowered. There's something about being there that's very exciting, because my personal experience, not as a student, but normally as a guest lecturer, is exactly what you're describing. Is that Stanford is a place where a group of people who are very curious and really want to make big shit happen in their lives come together to do stuff and work on stuff. That's the feeling I have when I leave Stanford. I feel I'm floating, because I feel like, wow, I've just been with all these smart people who really care about whatever the topic was.
Yeah, and remember you asked me, why did I come to California? Well, I felt that even just coming to the state, coming to the Bay Area, I felt like, oh my gosh, these are people who are willing to experiment, try things they haven't done before. It's funny. I grew up back east, and the messaging was very much, there's a very well-worn path, and this is the path you're supposed to take. Whereas when you come out here, and in fact, if you try to do something there that's off the beaten track, people go, so why are you going to do that? Or, what makes you think you can do that? When I was writing my first book, someone said to me, well, what makes you think you can write a book? Or what makes you think you can start a company? Whereas here, it's exactly the opposite. It's like, how can I help you? Wow, that's pretty cool. Tell me more about it. And that was really exciting. And I think that you're picking that up when you come onto campus, is this concentrated energy around, potential.
Yeah, it's almost like it's in the air, in the water. And, as somebody who's traveled a lot and have friends around the world, I get asked the question fairly regularly, what's the secret sauce of Silicon Valley? And, how could we make our area more like Silicon Valley? And actually, as a result of Legends and Losers a little while ago, I don't know that I can disclose who, so I should probably not say, but a state lawmaker, so an elected state official, emailed me and said, would I mind having a conversation with him about how they can empower entrepreneurs better in their state? And I was just knocked over. Anyway, so I guess my point is, I get asked this question all the time: how can we be more like Silicon Valley? And so my question for you is, how do you think about Stanford's role beyond just educating the students who are there, but really empowering this whole region?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And I think it's not as complicated as people think. Now, I'll give you an example. I think everybody is hungry for permission to think this way. And that's why when people want to come here, right? This is why when I came out, it's like, oh my gosh, I just 2 seconds before I got on this discussion with you, I got a long email from some person who said, I've been watching and listening to these talks online, and I visited Stanford, and I desperately want to be there. I mean, people desperately want to be in this environment. So why? Because I think it's very natural. And there are many situations around the world and around the country where this type of thinking is not supported. but with a little tiny bit of permission, it gets unlocked very quickly. So I'm going to give it to you a little story about how I know this. So you might remember my book, What I Wish I Knew When I Was 20.
I actually have some questions for you about that, but yes, I
Okay.
do. I do. And I love the title.
Wonderful. Well, that book, to my great surprise, ended up extremely successful in Asia, especially in Japan. And so the Japanese...
And as I remember, you did a ton of marketing of the book in Japan, right?
None. I did not. I'd never even been there. Okay. So I had never, it just took off. Okay. And so, because the book is really about how to make your own luck and how to break the rules and how to make things happen. And Japan is a country where that is not very typical. So it's interesting. All these young people are buying this book and reading it and writing to me. So here's what happens. They asked me to do a TV series in Japan. So I did. After saying no many times, I finally said, okay, fine. If we do it at Stanford, I'll do it. So we did an 8-part TV series, which I filmed at the D School at Stanford, and it showed on NHK, which is kind of like the PBS in Japan, and literally 4 times a day, 4 times a year, over and over. And they said, okay, this is all well and good, but it would never work in Japan. People think this is very entertaining. And I said, that's just not true. They said, yes, it wouldn't work here. Our young people are not as creative. And I said, I just don't believe that. So they said, prove it. So I went to Japan, and my first trip there, okay, I go to Osaka University. I did a 2-hour workshop, 2 hours.
On creativity, I assume?
An assignment that was due the next day. And in the same breath, I gave the same assignment to students at Stanford and around the world. So as through my colleagues, I essentially gave this assignment to people all over, including the students in Japan. And you know what? The kids in Japan blew my socks off. They said, I cannot believe how creative we are. And this is the big problem, is that the environment they create in their schools or in these companies doesn't allow it to flourish. But all I needed was a tiny little intervention to unlock it.
And so why is it, obviously you've written so extensively on creativity. My sense of it is that creativity is viewed by a lot of people as a talent. Oh, Michael Jordan has talent in basketball, and he has this, thing next to his kidney that makes him a great basketball player. And I don't have that kidney thing. Right. And so creativity is almost because you hear people say, I'm not really that much of a creative person.
You know what, honestly, it is such a ridiculous excuse, because creativity is not like eye color or height. It's like me, honestly, though, but it's like my saying I can't sing. And if you were a musician, you're a musician, right?
Yes, I am.
You would say to me, Tina, guess what? Of course you can sing. If you can talk, you can sing. Okay? I mean, I'm not talking in a monotone. I clearly can sing. And that if I spent some time and effort and maybe got some coaching, I probably could hum a pretty nice tune. Okay? And I would
at a minimum, you could make a decent noise, for sure.
Exactly. And so the same thing is true about creativity. Yes, just like being an athlete, there's some people who are natural athletes, but we can all get better. And honestly, lots of people can run a race. A lot of people can learn how to play basketball. And in fact, I think Michael Jordan is a great example, because if I understand correctly, he was not a great basketball player as a kid. He spent bazillion hours.
He's short. As a matter of fact, I recently had the extraordinary experience of having dinner with Bill Walton. You don't happen to know him by chance, do you?
No.
So do you know who he is? Do you remember who he is?
Yeah. So go on. Yeah.
Yeah. So he was talking a little bit about Jordan, and he said, he's just physically, he's not imposing. He's not that strong. He's definitely not that fast. He's certainly not that tall. Right. And so what made Michael Jordan were not his quote unquote physical gifts.
Right. Exactly. And that's true for creativity in every way. In fact, I would argue that all of us are incredibly creative as children. I mean, if you look at most kids, they've got a very vivid imagination. They're doing problem solving. They wouldn't learn how to walk and talk and ride a bicycle if they weren't creative problem solvers, right? I mean, this is just, it's a natural ability. But here's what happens. Our school system and our work environments are designed to squeeze it out, right? Exams with, multiple choice tests with one right answer. You're trained that there's one answer as opposed to trained that there are an infinite number of solutions. And so it gets beaten out of you. And so all you have to do is reframe, reshape the environment to unlock more creativity.
I just want to make sure I heard what you said. Our education system beats creativity out of kids?
Yes, of course. Yes.
Wow. And it is amazing because if you hang out with a 5-year-old, at the very beginning of their school life, they're insanely creative, right?
And go into kindergarten. Go into a kindergarten. What does it look like? There are all sorts of colorful things and crayons and Play-Doh and the broom all moves around. Okay, and they're all creative. And look at the high school classroom.
So
right?
do you
the
think
chairs are lined up in rows and columns. They're bolted to the floor. You've got a number 2 pencil.
And I was listening, actually, I can't remember if it was a video or in one of you'll have to excuse me because I've been consuming a lot of Tina lately in preparation for our dialogue. So I'm not sure what was where, but I read or heard you say you spent a lot of time in school writing silence is golden, silence is golden.
Exactly. I was always in trouble.
And isn't it a shame that kids get in trouble for being alive, being loud, being playful, being creative?
Exactly. Yeah, my sister was in fact sort of reminding me that she had very good grades, but always had a little U, as in like unacceptable or whatever, in self-control, right? Self-control.
And so do you think your passion for creativity and innovation, and obviously Stanford is world renowned for that, and of course other things as well, is that part of what drives the connection with, if you will, the Silicon Valley ecosystem?
I think it's one of the reasons that the Silicon Valley ecosystem, exists, and why it's also really exciting for all of these firms to be connected to Stanford, right? You've got this engine of ideas that are coming out of the university, and that is ideas and people and, all sorts of other resources that's feeding the valley.
Yeah, and sometimes it can feel to me as a immigrant to Silicon Valley that Sand Hill Road is almost an extension of Stanford in some ways.
Well, and in fact, the interesting thing is, as I said, you're right, Stanford feeds the valley, but the valley feeds Stanford, right? So we are blessed to have incredible people like you coming to our classrooms. We've got lots of mentors, lots of guest lecturers, lots of, people donating money and time and helping the students find special, interesting summer internships. So you've got this really rich environment that is very much like, if you think of it like a rainforest. You've got a very diverse environment where lots of experiments take place.
Yeah, and you also seem to do, and I know other universities do it as well, and I have a little less exposure to them than I do to Stanford, but Stanford, you guys seem to do such an incredible job with the Peggy Burks of the world, right? Or the Anne Miracos of the world, reaching out to legendary people in the Silicon Valley area who have deep expertise in a particular area and bringing them in as, do you call them guest lecturers or visiting professors or what?
They're all different types of roles. Yeah. So,
but they come in and teach in one form or another. And so it seems like there's this revolving door of people who aren't, classically trained educators who have a pretty deep involvement. Is that really what's going on?
Oh, yeah. And the thing is that people like Peggy and like Anne and like you are eager to come back. I mean, first of all, what an honor to come be invited. But also, with a little bit of time, you can end up really having a big influence on these young people who are hungry for real life experiences. In fact, I think one of the things that we can do as a result of this is give students living cases, right? One of the things I do in my classes is I take the students to companies and they will sit down with the leadership of a company and the company say, okay, this is what we're doing. This is the problem we're grappling with today. how might you solve this problem? And so the students get to see, wow, this is a real problem in a real company, and how would I deal with it? And not only do they get to then get some feedback on their ideas, but they gain the confidence that, hey, I could probably do this too.
The other thing I think happens, and obviously you know way better than I do, I think many of us, it was certainly true and still true for me today, it makes a giant difference to see people who've achieved the kind of things that I would like to achieve, either in the direct fields that I'm interested in or close enough for rock and roll. Because when we see legendary people on TV or in the media or on the internet, it can be easy to sort of say, oh, well, that's, you know, that person who won a Nobel Prize, or that person who's an amazing athlete, or that person who's, you know, Mark Zuckerberg on the cover of all these magazines. But yet when you take someone out, in the example you're giving now, to a company, and they get to meet, you know, great engineers and great marketers and of course great entrepreneurs and executives, and they see that they're regular people grappling with these big ideas, at least what's happened for me in the past is you go, oh, wait a minute, that person doesn't look that different from me. They probably pooped today. So I guess my question is, how much of it is getting in the environment, working on this stuff, you know, being in the mix, so to speak, and then how much of it is when I meet someone and I see them and I kind of project, I could almost project myself into the kind of thing they're doing.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that's super, super important that you brought up is that having role models is one of the most powerful things that influences you, right? So by being in an environment where there are a lot of people who are doing interesting things, and you can meet them and talk to them, and they look like you and they sound like you, and they might even share the things that they've done that didn't work, right? And you go, wow, you know, you're just like me. It gives me the confidence to do it too. And I think one of the problems, and this is a huge issue, so I get a chance to travel around the world and meet with people in other very, very different ecosystems. Here's a problem. They use Silicon Valley as their example. But then what happens as a result of that is people go, well, I'm not in Silicon Valley, and I don't look like those people or sound like those people, or they're not my friends. Therefore, it feels really foreign. I really encourage people to celebrate the local entrepreneurs, and there are local entrepreneurs everywhere, honestly. But people are blind. They don't even look at them because the newspaper loves to celebrate these, you know, Silicon Valley entrepreneurs. They're not celebrating the ones that are in other places. And so you're absolutely right. Having really a great local role models is critical.
Isn't that interesting? I mean, I know for me, I didn't have the benefit of an education. And so with no experience, no money, no relationships, and what most people would probably have considered no chance, you know, my only ability, or the only way I could go forward in life was to do, to read, and to seek out mentors. And those mentors are huge. And you've just done an amazing job, Tina, of engaging so many people. I guess that's another thing, which is I could see how it'd be easy for someone like you or Stanford as a whole to sort of take this position, whether deliberately or not, that, hey, we're the experts, we're the professor, we're Stanford. And we know, and our job is to impart to you. And it seems very different than that, the context that you operate in, that you're about kind of bringing people and ideas together and kind of let's see what happens when that happens. Is that the mindset, or what is your mindset in terms of including new people and other new ideas?
Oh my goodness, you know, that's what makes it so exciting, is bringing people together with very different points of view. That's where, and different disciplines. I mean, we know that especially today, the most interesting things are happening across disciplines. And so, in fact, some of the most interesting things happening on campus are interdisciplinary institutes that bring people together. One of the things that's kind of funny about this, isn't it? When we think about disciplines, I mean, I often think about what defines a discipline, right? A discipline, I mean, okay, I'm a biologist because I use microscopes, or I'm a astronomer because I've got a telescope, or I'm a, you know, I mean, whatever, pick your topic. You know, I'm a chemist because I use test tubes. And so I think we are now starting to really break down those barriers and really being much more problem-based. Like, okay, we need to think about climate change. Okay, what we need to look at it from a social perspective and from an environmental, or like a geologic perspective and a historical perspective. So we're now realizing that the problems we're trying to face actually require people come from very different backgrounds and points of view if we're going to make a big difference.
So one of the things I've seen you talk about and write about, I think a lot, or maybe I'm just attracted to it. So I see it in a bunch of your work. You talk about framing and reframing things.
It is my passion. I think that is one of the biggest missed opportunities we have in helping people become better problem solvers. We so believe that the frame we're using to look at a problem is correct, when really, if we shifted it a little bit or expanded it or contracted it, we're going to end up seeing so many different opportunities. I mean, I use lots of examples. I mean, let me just give you one that I was thinking about this week as an example. So let's say you said, we need to figure out a cure for cancer. I mean, that sounds like a great idea, right? A cure for cancer.
Boy, do we ever.
Okay, but maybe we're not asking the right question, right? Maybe the question is, how do we prevent cancer, right? Preventing cancer is a totally different solution set to curing cancer. Or maybe we say, you know what? Cancer is actually a natural process as its cells do mutate. Maybe how do we live with cancer? Because treating cancer, we often assume we've got to kill every cancer cell. But if you assume I don't have to kill every cancer cell, I just have to kill enough so that somebody can live a nice life. Or then maybe that's the question. How do we make sure that people who have cancer live comfortably or live longer? The point is, each one of these questions unlocks very, very different solutions. And I'm a fan of the concept of framestorming. So framestorming before you brainstorm. Before you start falling in love with the solutions, you need to fall in love with the problem and really, really nail that problem. Make sure you're working on the right thing before you even start attempting to looking at solutions.
Professor, I need to say something to you right now.
Okay.
Before I say it, I need to say two things about what I'm going to say, though.
Okay.
A, I really want you to hear this in the way that I mean it. And B,
okay.
I might be the most happily married man you know. Okay. So with those two things said, man, do I want to kiss you right now.
I love you.
No, it's so great what you're saying, because I've tried to teach myself to think about thinking. I learned at about 18 that we could really think about thinking, not just have thoughts. And so this framing thing is something, and I didn't use framing as a language to describe it when I was 18, but this framing idea that you're on, I think, is so freaking powerful. I find myself a lot in life saying to people, I'm not sure if we're having the right conversation.
Right. And this is the problem, because we need to really teach people to do this. We give people problems which, the sort of typical, what's the sum of 5 plus 5, right? And you assume it's the right question. But if you turned it around and said, what two number, and then, there's one right answer. Okay, we got that. Check the box. But what if you said what two numbers add up to 10, right? And then now how many answers are there to that? An infinite number of solutions. And in fact, the most interesting piece of this is not the question, what two numbers add up to 10? It's that actually that's the way life really works. In life, we are given problems like that. Okay, figure out how to sell this product. Okay, nobody's going to tell you the two things you have to do to get to sell it. They're just telling you, here's the goal, or here's a problem, climate change, or curing cancer, whatever. We're giving you the goal. And then we're not telling you what you have to do. And so this is why so many people start struggling when they get into the workforce, because they've only been given problems with one right answer. And here is the problem here.
Well, and that's what I love about what you're doing that I think is so powerful as an educator. If I'm an educator and I take a mental construct, that is to say, my job is to impart knowledge, which on its face sounds smart and reasonable and logical and so forth. But if you say, okay, my job is to also teach people how to think about thinking,
Well, this is the issue, though, is that in schools, one of the biggest challenges they have is that they need to measure whether they've taught people things. And
Right. You measure my knowledge with a test, right?
it's super easy to give a test that has a right answer because it's super easy to grade that test. But if I gave you an open-ended problem without a right answer, how do I evaluate it? And one of my favorite quotes, and I'm going to forget who it's from, so you can go check it out and put it in your show notes.
Maybe I can Google it as you're talking.
Okay, you can Google it. It's often attributed to Einstein, but I believe it's not. And the quote is, "Not all things that count can be counted, and not all things that can be counted count."
Yeah,
and
it's so great.
It's such an important thing to keep in mind, that we need to think about those things that really count, that are really, really, really are hard to measure.
Yeah, I love that. So if you go back to Framestorming, which I love so much, if I'm, an executive or an entrepreneur, or I'm a researcher trying to cure cancer, whatever kind of project me and the team I'm on is working on, and we now, we're up against something, we say, hey, we need to brainstorm about this. How much framestorming should I do as a percent? Let's say, and I'm going to allot a certain amount of time. As a percentage of the time that you go to sort of work on this, what percentage should be framestorming versus brainstorming?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. I think you should give yourself not only a significant period of time to really immerse yourself in the problem, but also even give yourself a goal of, like, we're going to come up with 20, 30, 40 different questions that we might want to ask.
Right.
And so what I do with my students is that when they get problems for like a term project, I will give them a very open-ended problem. It might be sleep or memory or death. And each team has to framestorm and come up with as many, types of problems they might want to tackle in that space.
The other one I've been dying to ask you about is the languaging around the framing. So if we go back to your comment about cancer, I'm a student of languaging. So I don't mean like studying English, but studying the way we use language to describe things. So for example, on cancer, you hear a lot about how we need to fight cancer. And if you get diagnosed with cancer, doctors will even say to you, okay, well, here's our program for how we're going to help fight your cancer. And I don't know. I don't know shit about cancer or doctoring, but it's an interesting framing. And
yes, and in fact, that's really important. The metaphors we use dramatically shape the way we see the problem, right? I mean, you can take anything in our life and come up with lots of different metaphors that allows you. That's a great way. So let me just sort of say yes, and using metaphor is one of the most powerful ways to unlock different frames for addressing a problem.
Yeah, and so look, I don't know, is fight the right frame for cancer?
It may not be.
My friend, the legendary designer, John Bielenberg, his philosophy, he calls it thinking wrong. And what he says is how you start to think wrong is you pick whatever the topic that you're working on is, and you say, okay, what would most reasonable, smart people say, do, or think about this topic? Boom, fight cancer. And he says, okay, what's the opposite of that?
Right. What if I love cancer? What would happen there?
Right. And then recently on Legends and Losers, we had on this guy named Chris Voss. You'd love him. He was the top hostage negotiator for the FBI.
Uh-huh.
And he now teaches negotiation. He wrote a book that came out. Actually, he's published by HarperCollins, as we are. And he was telling me about a particular scenario. It was in the Middle East. I want to say Dubai, but anyway. And he was asked the question by the king or the sultan or whoever was looking to hire him to help with this hostage situation. He said, okay, well, what are you going to say to these hostage takers? And he said, well, the first thing we probably should say to them is, what you're doing is a very great thing.
Wow.
It hit me in the, the privates, because it was so unexpected. And he said, what you're trying to do is begin to empathize with them and come at a problem from the opposite way in which, in this case, the other person's going to assume you're going to come at it. And so for some reason, these things have been rattling around in my head.
How'd that play out? So tell us how'd that work?
The hostages ended up freed.
Yeah, but how did the conversation go from there? How did that framing unlock the possibilities?
Well, the hostage taker was taken aback because he was expecting a combative kind of a discussion. Right. And it led to a conversation about, okay, well, why is this a great thing?
Yeah, so it's interesting because my colleague Bob Sutton has a book that's coming out called The Asshole Survival Guide.
I saw that on your Twitter feed.
Talk to him, okay? You need to talk to Bob. And one of the, in talking to him about the book, one of the things I often think about is when people are acting like a real jerk, to me, I give myself a challenge to just be as nice as possible. I mean, first of all, they don't expect it, but the second thing is it totally diffuses it. It's like all of a sudden the energy, they're expecting someone to push back. But if you don't push back and you just sort of use sort of a martial art to just don't respond the way that they're expecting to escalate the situation, it gets diffused.
Now, this is not my hallmark, so this is an area of improvement for me, but one that I work on a lot. And to your point, I've been trying to condition myself, Tina, when somebody, because this happens on the road, of course, when somebody gives you the finger on the road.
No.
It happens. No, I'm saying when someone else gives me the finger, yeah. I've been known to give people the finger, but when someone gives me the finger on the road today, what I try to do, and so far I'm relatively successful, is to respond with a peace sign.
Ah, great. I love that. What's also interesting? I so often see people responding with a certain mindset that they think they know what's going on. I'll give you just a personal example. I was thinking of something someone else did recently that really unnerved me, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to talk about a personal example. I was in a meeting and there was a former student who is now an executive in the room, and we were talking about, alumni relations, whatever, and he kept checking his phone. Kept checking his phone, kept texting, and I'm thinking, what a jerk. Here you are, and here you are texting, like, just be here. This is rude. Okay, now that would be a sort of a typical response, right? Wow, why is he so distracted? He's not paying attention to me. But after the meeting, he came up to me and said, Tina, I just want to let you know, my newborn baby was in the hospital last night, with problems with breathing, and I just was checking in with my wife. And I'm thinking, oh my God, what were you even doing in the meeting? Now he became a hero for being in the room as opposed to a jerk, who was distracted. And so I keep reminding myself when people are doing something that doesn't make sense to me, like someone cuts you off on the road. Oh my God, maybe they're sick and on the way to the hospital. I don't know. I don't know what's going on. I'm just I'm going to assume the best as opposed to the worst.
It's so interesting. This is an area I keep trying to teach myself. So I just had this exact same thing happen. So there's a company that I've been asked to get involved with through a venture capital group that I know, and I really like the VCs, and I really like the entrepreneur and the executive team. And so we started to work together. We'd sort of had a handshake on what the deal was, and we're sort of going through the kind of the legalities of it. And we got to this sticking point. And so our contract wasn't signed, and we were stuck on this issue. And all of a sudden we got very stuck. And it didn't seem like a big issue to me. And I was like, why the fuck are we stuck? And I could feel myself getting angry about it and sort of wanting to sort of give it to the CEO and sort of, become very confrontational about it. And then to your point, Tina, I had this aha, which is this guy stupid? No, he's not stupid at all. As a matter of fact, he's really, really smart. Is this guy an asshole? Not at all. As a matter of fact, I have not seen 1 milli-inch of assholeness from this guy. I've seen quite the opposite. And yet we're stuck. So I remembered the old Stephen Covey, seek first to understand and then to be understood, right? So when I had this call with him a few days ago, the thing I said to him was, let's just call him Jimmy. Hey, Jimmy, why is this topic such a big concern for you guys? And then all this stuff came out that I was not aware of. I was like, oh, well, that's easy. None of that stuff's a problem for me. We can make all that go away. And so you understand my point.
Yeah, of course. You know what my favorite sort of quote about this is that, and I have to remind myself, is that you never know what's going on fully with someone else. And that you should treat everyone as if they have a broken heart, because they probably do. Right? Like, you have no idea what burden someone is carrying around with them. Maybe they physically hurt. Maybe they just got some really bad news. Maybe, who knows? But life is very complicated, and we are parachuting into it, an interaction with someone. We have no idea what's happened before. And it really is our responsibility to take the time to try to understand.
Yeah, it's really, it really is an amazing thing to broaden your mind and try to get out of your own perspective. And so in that context, you've also written a lot about not just how to be creative, but how to take your creativity and put it in the world, because many of us have great ideas. We think, like, what was that old, in Night Shift, where Michael Keaton's walking around with the tape recorder because he's got all the ideas, and he says, note to self, feed mayonnaise to tuna fish. And so we all, or many of us, have these ideas, and some of us have a hard time getting those ideas into the world. What's the big secret there?
Okay, so this is a really interesting point, is that people have a lot of great ideas, and then they get stuck. And I did, must have been a couple of years ago, I did a Reddit AMA, and it was really fun, actually. There were, lots and lots and lots of people. It was like, I teach creativity at Stanford, ask me anything. And one of the most common issues was this, is I've got this big idea, I don't know what to do. And the thing that I realized is that people don't understand that you need to just do something little. It's not about seeing your name in lights and, imagining, it's like, okay, so you wrote a book, right? You had to write the first page, right? You needed to write a table of contents. You needed to talk to one person and get one story. If you are willing, you should just do one little experiment, to test to see if it's a good idea. Like, okay, do I actually like writing? Let me sit down today and spend an hour writing. Okay, that kind of worked. Okay, let's see if I can do it tomorrow. Okay, let me show it to someone. Maybe I should put it on a blog and see if anyone responds to this. There are lots and lots of ways, no matter what you're doing. My favorite concept around this is prototyping, which my colleague, Alberto Savoia, came up with this concept. The idea is that a prototype tests if something will work, but a prototype tests if you're working on the right thing. And so you do these tiny little experiments to see if you're going in the right direction. And that's the way to start. And to give yourself permission to just do some tiny things, and the thing is, you do a little experiment, if the results come out well, now you're motivated to do a bigger experiment, right? Okay, now maybe I'll spend an hour and a quarter writing. Okay, maybe I'll talk to 2 more people. So essentially, you really need to start small as opposed to starting big.
And that idea is connected in my mind to another thing I think you talk a fair amount about, which is being a quilt maker.
Yeah.
Are these two ideas connected for you, or how are they?
They certainly work together, because I borrowed this metaphor from Heidi Neck, who's at Babson. And the idea is that there are people who are quilt makers and those people who are puzzle builders. And the puzzle builders are those people who sort of look at the world as one right answer. They look at getting, like a jigsaw puzzle, someone else gives you the assignment, here's what the puzzle is, and this is what you're supposed to complete. But of course, if you're a puzzle builder and you're missing any pieces, you can't finish it and you get frustrated. But quilt makers are those people who, first of all, define what success looks like themselves, right? It's not just some puzzle that everyone else is making, but they also, if they're missing a piece, no big deal, they'll find something else in the quilt to fill it in and get them to their goal. So quilt makers are much more successful in getting to their goals than puzzle builders.
And the reason I asked about starting small is I guess there, what do I know about quilt making? Zero. But you could start off with one little piece of fabric, right? You don't have to go to Fabric R Us and buy the greatest fabric in the world. And You could literally start with an old, an old
An old
towel
shirt.
or
You can
something.
start with
Yeah,
an
an
old
old
shirt.
shirt.
You know, it's funny because I know you made a comment about the stuff that's behind me on the screen here. These are, so one of the things that I do is I make uh, collages. And my medium these days is New Yorker covers. So it's a way for me to sort of look at old things in new ways. And I'm looking at them through, whatever colors and shapes and what are the little images. And it's fun. It's like being a quilt maker. And it's a way for me to practice being a quilt maker every day by taking one thing and repurposing it for something else.
The other thing I loved about that analogy is, I would assume, again, I don't know anything about quilts, but when you're quilting, is that what you say?
Yeah.
When you're quilting, that's the thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. You might have a vision, like, I'm going to do New Yorker covers or whatever your thing that you're quilting, but I would imagine it's very hard to have a complete picture of how it's going to end up, right?
You're absolutely right. In fact, it's most likely going to be a surprise yeah.
And as I've read and heard you talk about this, I'm reminded by one of my favorite quotes from Michelangelo when they asked him how he created his famous sculpture, David. Have you heard this quote?
No. Oh, yeah, this is about finding what was inside.
Right. What he said was, all I did was remove everything that wasn't
exactly.
David. And so there's this thing about, like, well, we start and we sort of dance with what happens. And I know this may sound corny, but for me, creativity often feels like channeling. And like, when I'm working on something, I often ask myself, like, what does this thing want? Like, this thing's moving, this thing's pulling me somewhere. What does it want? What does it want to say if it's words, right? And so I almost find that creativity is as much about discovering something as it is generating something.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I was talking with some authors a few nights ago, and one of them talked about writing a book is like being pregnant and having to give birth to this idea, and that there's some urgency. It's growing, and feeling some urgency to bring it to the world.
Yeah, and I guess I don't know if the analogy keeps going forward, but you have this vision of what the thing's going to be, and then this child gets born and grows up and becomes its own person. And so, I don't know how you feel. It's a great question. For me, Play Bigger, our book, it's something today, a little over a year after launch, that I never could have imagined. And so, my personal experience was giving category design to the world, and then once it's out in the world, it's going and it's doing all these things, and it surprises the shit out of me every day, because some of it's somewhat expected, but a lot of it's not. Is that sort of the mindset?
Well, and then it's really interesting because the responses you get there, it becomes a dance, right? You put it out in the world, and then there's sort of a dance that you do then with the world in response to it. It's interesting. I don't know if you know this, but so my last book is called Inside Out. Well, and so what happened is it came out the same week as Pixar's Inside Out, which was
it did not. I didn't know
it was
that.
a little bit confusing. And then when you say Inside Out, I love the title. It's so clever, but people hear Inside Out, and then they didn't make sense. So my publisher, HarperCollins, was kind enough that when it's coming out in paperback, they let me change the title and the cover and let me edit it.
Wow.
So it's coming out in just a few weeks, and it's called now, you want to know the new title?
I'm dying to hear it.
It's called Creativity Rules. So I'm super excited about it. And the thing is, I got to go, and part of that dance was that I got to go back in, because it had a new title and a new cover, and change some of the content. And in fact, the opening story of the book is changed, not in content, but in framing. I took the entire story and I looked at it from a different angle. And I was so happy once I was able to do that. I felt like it all of a sudden made the entire book. It framed the book much better once I was able to go in and reshape it. So anyway,
now I'm not an expert on publishing, Tina, but it's pretty unusual for a publisher like HarperCollins to do that. Is it not?
That's really unusual. But the thing is, they were super excited about the book, and the people it didn't get the same traction as we were hoping, and thought, you know what, maybe we made a mistake in the framing of it, and it was a little bit too obtuse. And so they gave me a chance to say, let's see if we can try it again.
So when you say creativity rules, obviously there's two ways to interpret that. It's what the French call a double entendre, of course. And so I would have thought, in terms of legal rules, if you will, that there were no legal rules in creativity. So what do you mean by creativity rules?
Okay, so yeah. In fact, it's actually the name of one of the classes I teach, is creativity rules. So it really takes what I did in my class, but also in this book, is realize that there really are some very clear constructs. First of all, definitions, relationships, attitudes, and actions that really do foster the creative process. And so this is what the book is about. It goes from the seeds of imagination through implementation, looking at what actually has to happen to do that. So it looks at imagination, and it requires engaging in the world and envisioning what might be different. That creativity requires motivation and then experimentation. Innovation requires focus and reframing. And then entrepreneurship requires persistence and inspiring others. And the idea is that once you understand this framework, you're much more empowered to actually go through this process.
What I love so much about what you're doing, Tina, is you're taking what for some has been intuitive or implicit to them, and you're making it explicit for us.
Well, in fact, that was exactly what the hope was. I talked to many, many entrepreneurs and shared the framework with them, and they said, you know what, this is exactly what happened. And so I felt very confident that I had come up with at least a model. Of course, all models are wrong to some degree, but it created something, a framework that allows us to have a much clearer discussion about the process, and also allows us to know where we are, so that we're not talking past each other. One of the key things of this framework is a distinction between creativity and innovation. And so I define creative ideas that are new to you, me, but innovative ideas are new to the world. And people often conflate those and use the words interchangeably. But here's what happens. That means that if we really want to come up with something innovative, if we come up with something creative, we might mistake that as something that's an innovation. But if I say, hey, listen, Christopher, that's an amazingly creative idea. You invented a peanut butter sandwich. Wonderful. But you know what? Other people have done that before. Let's push further and see if we can come up with something that's truly unique.
Yeah, it's very creative for a child to paint a dog. Mm-hmm. As a guy that learned to play guitar as a teenager, right? You feel pretty freaking creative when you can play G, E, and D.
Exactly. But okay, now how do I push further to come up with something that's new to the world? So I know we only have a couple minutes left. So how do we want to end this?
Well, I have a couple things I would love to say to you, but is there anything else that you'd like to touch on before we wrap?
No, I'm just delighted. I'm so thrilled. What a perfect way to spend my Saturday afternoon.
So I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for your work.
You're so kind.
It's been a tough summer in America, right? And a tough summer in a lot of the world. And maybe I'm getting mushier as I get older. I don't know, but my respect and my admiration for you, getting up every day with a commitment to sharing this knowledge, to cultivating this knowledge, to really empowering the next generation, and to engage. I love that you're not in an ivory. You're the opposite of what I thought. When I was younger, a university professor was. You're the opposite. You're in the world, you're traveling, you're writing, you're obviously deeply engaged with the Silicon Valley community. And it's just, you're such an inspiration. And in specific, there will never be words, Tina, for me to thank you for the love and support that you gave me and my co-authors in writing Play Bigger.
Well, I think it's a super important book, and I mean, am delighted that you invited me to help you. So I'm
you kidding?
So delighted, and I couldn't be happier to have you in my life.
Well, thank you. I can't believe that I even get to talk to you, but thank you so much. Thank you for your time today. And man, I would love to have you back with your dad.
Oh, let's do that. I will. Let's make it happen.
Absolutely. Tina, have a wonderful weekend and bless you.
Talk to you soon. Ciao.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Whew. Man, I don't believe I get to do that. Never thought I'd be hanging out with somebody as smart and awesome and generous as Tina. If there's somebody in your life who you think would love this episode, why not share it with them right now? That would be most legendary of you. We would love it if you checked us out on legendsandlosers.com. And if you subscribe there, you'll make sure that you'll never miss any of the fun. Legendsandlosers.com. And we've got a new website coming soon. So please hang out on legendsandlosers.com until you see something that looks new, and then hang out some more. All right. We would like to thank HarperCollins, Instant Classic, Play Bigger, How Pirates, Dreamers, and Innovators Create and Dominate Markets, Equity Directory, connecting startups to the talent and resources they need to build a legendary business at equitydirectory.com. NetSuite, #1 in cloud ERP. Come check us out at netsuite.com. OneLifeFullyLived.org. Dream, plan, and live your best life, and come see us in Sacramento. Rapid Media, legendary marketing outcomes in beautiful Australia at rapidmedia.com.au. PursuingResults.com, producers of legendary podcasts. If you want to put on a great podcast, check out PursuingResults.com. They produce legendary podcasts, and this one too. InterviewValet.com, podcast interview marketing. If you're smart, get your smarts on podcasts at InterviewValet.com. And of course, HarperCollins Smash Hit, brand new book, Creativity Rules. Get ideas out of your head and into the world, by our friend and today's guest, Professor Tina Seelig. Chi Power Arts Healing in Santa Cruz, beautiful Santa Cruz, California. Check out chipowerarts.com. Tahoe Truckee Homes, make your mountain dreams come true at TahoeTruckeeHomes.com. Brandon Smith Audio in Santa Cruz, California. Shareology, the legendary must-read book from our friend and guest on episode 19, the guru himself, Brian Kramer. WWF, because our planet and wildlife matter. Check us out at WWF.org. And Doctors Without Borders, a.k.a. MSF, a.k.a. Médecins Sans Frontières. You make a donation, and we make a difference in the toughest places on planet Earth. We must remind you that this oddcast is the sole property of the Legends and Losers Oddcast Network, and we would love it if you shared the shit out of it. All rights do remain disturbed. We must warn you, this oddcast is produced clearly in a studio that does contain nuts. However, it is never tested on GMOs. Listen to the Tragically Hip. Don't forget George Carlin was right. Support your local university professor. Never jog near a prison. Teach kids to code. When this podcast is done, go outside. Swearing makes you smarter. Don't forget to take your vitamins and drink your scotch. Thank you, Candy Dandy. We love you. And hey, Colin, this oddcast really ties the room together, doesn't it? Today, our deepest apologies go out to Dick Smith, former chief executive of Equifax. Hey, Dick, sorry, we just ran out of time for you. That's it, my friends. Be legendary, and we'll see you again soon on another episode of Legends and Losers.